You're listening to the AZREIA Show. If you're looking for quality real estate investing information that you can trust, you've found it. Stay tuned and join the tens of thousands of members that have already benefited from AZREIA, your home for education, market information, support, and networking opportunities that will advance your real estate investing career.
Welcome to another episode of the AZREIA Show. I'm Jeremy Holden, your host today. We're doing a mini-series specifically on short-term rentals. So we're going to have 4 different episodes where we're going to break down the fundamentals of short-term rentals. We're going to do one on cleaning, one on operations, one on acquisition, and another one on install and setup. Today we're here with Allyson Kessary, and we're going to talk specifically about what does it take to get your property set up. So Allyson, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, and then we'll dive into it?
Yeah, so my husband and I own the Sunkissed group, which we are vacation rental managers. We've got a small portfolio of about 10 properties. We are growing, but we do have a division called Sunkissed Setups where we do install and setups for properties that are launching as short-term rentals.
So for like the setup portion, I think for a lot of people, like they're used to booking an Airbnb or they're used to buying Airbnbs. But there definitely is that like middle ground, that gray area of like what happens after closing and then what happens when you actually go live with it. Can you talk a little bit about high level, what a setup looks like in that timeline?
Sure. So I call it it's actually a 4-step process. First, you would be, beyond design. We need to design and make sure that we've designed it appropriately. But then beyond that, we need to procure any of the items. So that's ordering and getting that on site. Then it's the receiving of those products. So someone needs to be on site. It's usually 2.5 weeks of products coming into the home, opening those packages, making sure nothing's broken, all of that. And then it's install. So it's building and bringing that design to life. And then the 4th step is what I call launch. And so it's between the install and actually going live. Are we guest ready? Is the internet working? Are things labeled so guests can find it? So it's really that I'm thinking ahead so we get that beautiful guest experience.
Sounds like that's a lot of moving parts and you're wearing a lot of different hats, right? Like as a realtor and an investor on my end, I'm used to saying, okay, this is the house we want to buy. This is the property manager we go with. This is the lender. But it seems like after closing, there's all these different steps. So what hats can somebody who buys an Airbnb, what can they expect to basically take on after closing?
Well, I think that's really interesting because I think when investors are looking at purchasing a short-term rental, they are using all these like amazing apps and platforms and they're underwriting the costs and what is it going to potentially make. And those are the numbers they're really thinking about in the process. And I think in a lot of investors' minds, the second that closing happens, it's just like, okay, now we launch a short-term rental when in fact the real work and the really important work starts at that point. And I'm going to use a little bit of an analogy here. I think of like someone who wants to open a restaurant. They know that an old town or a certain area of the city is a great place to open a restaurant. And they found a great building. So they know what the cost is going to be. They've underwritten that rent. But that's it. That's all they've done. They haven't thought through like, what is the restaurant going to be? What kind of food am I going to have? You can't just have all the cuisines. Instead, like, are we going to be an Italian restaurant? Yeah, you're already starting to think like, okay, it's a beautiful brick building, great lighting. You're thinking through like, we want to have small spaces for couples, maybe beautiful tablecloths. You're already even thinking through the font on the menu. So I think if we take that analogy into a short-term rental, then you start to see like, okay, it's not just the purchasing of the house. It is who are we serving? Who's going to be staying in that property? How are we going to design it so that people want to come and stay in that property? How many people do we sleep? Do we need bunk beds? Do we not want bunk beds? Is occupancy as in the number of folks that can stay in that property? How important is that? So, and then beyond like, okay, those small little details, now it's the time that it takes to implement that. So time becomes an issue as well, because we have to decide on those designs, decide on the products we're going to put in the house. Now we need to start ordering them and receiving them. And so I think those are the steps that the investors are not realizing the amount of work that goes into preparing a successful property to launch.
So as a realtor, like I typically will send folks houses and then we'll take a look at the houses and we'll be like, okay, this would make a really great Airbnb. But then there's definitely that piece that you're alluding to, which is that there's a lot of project planning that takes place. There's definitely a certain type of guest that stays, an experience that we're creating. So what type of advice would you give to investors that are currently looking for short-term rentals or getting into it? At what point should they start thinking about those things? Would it be, after closing, during the transaction period? Do you think that they should have that idea ahead of time? Like, where do you think they would start creating that recipe?
Well, I think it should always sort of be in the back of your mind, like when you're looking at certain areas. And I'm going to use the Scottsdale, Phoenix area because that's where we are.
Yeah.
But if you're purchasing in Old Town Scottsdale, we know who's mostly traveling there. We know that we want to potentially cater to the bachelor or bachelorette crowd, kind of a little more youthful sort of crowd. We know if we're purchasing out in Mesa, out by the sporting fields, we're probably going to have sporting teams. We got moms traveling with 16 kids. We got to pack those kids in there. It's more important that we get those occupancy numbers up. We got to make sure we have kid-friendly kinds of activities in those. So you're already starting to think you should know who potentially those guest travelers are. Maybe you're not getting to the micro planning of design at that point, but you should have that in the back of your mind. And then beyond that, you need to decide, am I a person that can DIY a design? Am I someone who can go online and start looking at design and do that? Which is fantastic if you have that kind of eye. Or are you someone who's like, no, I can't do that. So we need to start thinking ahead. Maybe I'm going to start considering hiring a designer of some sort. And there are wonderful short-term rental designers out there that really understand the short-term rental market. So you're starting to already think like, what kind of investor am I? Am I a DIY investor or am I a hands-off investor?
That's a really great point that you bring up on figuring out what type of investor you are so that then you can execute on your project better. I feel like I have a lot of clients that, that will go down different paths. Say, I actually have ChatGPT and I actually have AI and I have Claude, and they'll actually create like a lot of design renderings. Now, from an acquisition standpoint, I say, hey, that's amazing that we can, turn the house into that. Now, for somebody like yourself that actually lives and breathes, the property management, the designs, the installs, what do you make of, the rise of AI? And do you think that a professional still needs to get involved? Or do you think that like using AI, you actually can effectively DIY it?
I think you can DIY it to a point.
Okay.
I think just like AI in any setting, it's only going to take you so far. It's never going to produce that human touch. It's not going to be able to think for you. So yes, I think that AI has its place, but I do not think, especially some high-producing properties, it's just not going to do the trick.
Yeah.
For those kinds of properties. Potentially, maybe a little lower mid-range property, it might be the way to go. That it could help you with maybe procurement lists, or you can take a photo of a property that you like. And feed it into your AI, and it can pop out sort of a rendering for you of products. So that could potentially be a way to go. My issue is I suspect what will happen is that the design throughout the home will not be entirely cohesive.
Mm-hmm.
That you will have like little vignettes in every room, and then it's not going to pull together. And consumers are going to see that. They will know that. So I think if you're going to do the DIY, to really keep an eye on that cohesive.
It's almost like the AI does all the decision making,
Mm-hmm.
but if like in real, which can obviously be planned, but obviously things do come up throughout an install or a design that come up where maybe the AI can't help you think on your feet to get through those. So I would pivot to now ask you, in what scenarios do you think that it would make sense for an investor to actually offload the design and the install, building the furniture,
Sure.
bringing in the packages? at what point would they want to partner with somebody like yourself or a designer versus not?
Sure. Listen, I think all of us have certain resources, right? Our resources are going to be either financial resources, they're going to be time resources, they're going to be energy resources. So how do you want to use your resource? If you have maybe a bigger financial pocket to pull from, but you are a high income earner who's working 60, 80 hours a week, plus has a bunch of kids doing sports, you maybe don't have that time or kind of energy to take on this kind of project and you want to offload it. So it all just comes down to what your resources are. We also need to look at time as time from purchase to time to launch, because that also is financial decision. The longer you're sitting empty and you're not on the market, you're not making money. And you're potentially also missing a booking window, right? Like if busy season is booking 60 to 90 days out, you don't want to miss that window. So you need to kind of keep an eye on that price. So someone may choose to offload pieces of this between purchase and launch because, number one, they don't have the time and they're recognizing like, okay, I cannot make all these decisions for design. So I'm going to hire a designer that's going to produce all of the design boards for me. They're going to tell me exactly where to hang every picture, what height to hang the curtains, where to put the TVs. They're going to make every decision for me. Plus, they're going to give me a procurement list. Fantastic. That took a little bit off of my brain. Okay, me as a investor now, okay, maybe I can take care of the ordering, right? Or they're like, no, I don't even have time to do the ordering. So someone like us, we can do the ordering and procurement part. And we would do the receiving. Listen, receiving takes, like I said, 2.5 weeks at least.
So receiving would be just getting the packages and bringing them to the house.
So now let's say whoever does the procurement has ordered everything to the property, whether that's the owner or someone like us that does the procurement. Things have started arriving. They trickle in and someone has to be on site. Someone needs to be at that property. You need to have somebody there in the morning and then you need to have somebody there at 10 at night because for some reason Amazon delivers at 10 p.m. and you don't want stuff sitting outside. So you need to be paying someone, or you as the investor need to be on site to receive those packages so they safely get inside. So over that 2.5 weeks, we have to have staff on site, or you as the investor need to be on site, making sure those packages are getting inside. You need to open them, make sure they're not broken, and that what you ordered is in fact what was received in the correct color. You need to mark that off on the procurement list, which has hundreds, sometimes thousands of items. So you need to account for them and make sure that they get into the correct room in the home. So that's a huge process. And then let's not even talk about garbage because garbage is insane. We just had a property where we filled a 40-yard garbage, one of those, I don't know what they're called, like bin, and we still had to haul away garbage.
We did one where we had 5. We filled up a garage 5 times in a row.
It's insane. It's insanity.
The first time we ever did a property setup and we DIY'd it, I lived in an apartment in Old Town and I wanted to make sure that everything came on time. So the house was in Mesa, but I lived in Old Town, so it's like a 30-minute drive. The apartment was on the 2nd floor and it was maybe 1,200 square feet. I ordered a 5-bedroom house to my apartment. So every day I'd come home, my roommate would be like, what's going on? It looks like a warehouse. And the whole apartment was filled to the brim with furniture. And then we'd have to haul everything from the apartment over to Mesa. So that took probably like a 2 or 3 day process and a lot of gas that we wasted. So I think you make a really good point that without like detailed project planning or experience, and you really do need the mix of those two, that it could take, if you're booking window 60 to 90 days, let's say you do buy your Airbnb 3 months out. If you're a new investor, there's a good chance that it might take you 3 or 4 months between kids, work, life, your family, vacations. What do you think are like the biggest mistakes that somebody makes if they're looking to do a DIY that as a professional, you'd be able to like circumvent and really just make sure that gets alleviated?
Well, if they're DIYing, let's say they're doing A to Z DIY, typically a mistake that folks make is that they design a home for what they would live in. So they're buying the furniture from Costco and those area rugs, which we all know what I'm talking about. They, like they're all like these standard furnishings. So number one, that's the biggest mistake I would say, is kind of designing for yourself. The second is underestimating the amount of time it takes.
For the designing for yourself, why shouldn't people be designing for themselves?
Oh, first of all, this is a vacation.
Okay.
That's a vacation, right? People are going on a vacation. I don't want to live in my house when I'm on vacation. I want to live in a fantasy. So I don't want to live with my the furnishings and the space that I would typically live in my home. I want to go and feel like I'm on vacation, and someone has all these little thoughtful pieces that make me think, oh, that's really sweet or cute, or I'm so comfortable in this space, or I can sit and have my coffee in this little nook, which I don't have at home because it's filled with clutter and, and my life, right? So we don't want to design, because typically at home, unless you're some fabulous youthful designer yourself, I mean, typically our homes are like kind of one note and a little vanilla.
Yeah, very
right?
very functional.
Very functional, because that's how you live. That's the truth of it. But on vacation, a vacation rental, we want to have those little spaces that create a moment that you can take photos in, that you want to spend time with your family, that you're around a record player or a lighted sign, that you're doing selfies. You really need to think through those moments of what vacation is. And a point I want to bring up is, for 80% of travelers, unless you're a business traveler or whatever, who's shopping for the family for vacation? It's the mama. The mommies are shopping for the vacation. So they're the one that are scrolling through those photos. They want a Pinterest moment. They want to find the cutest, the most interesting. That's where they're going to stop that scroll when they're on Airbnb, shooting through all the listings that happen to be in Scottsdale, Phoenix, Mesa, right? They're going to stop on the one that speaks to them. And it's not going to be the one that looks like their house.
We see that in our reviews, and I'm sure you do too.
Yes.
If you look in the reviews of our properties, your properties, 90% of them are moms, aunts, grandmas, girlfriends, wives.
Yes.
And reading those reviews are really important, because it also highlight what you just said, is that people are looking for, like, we're in Arizona, they want a beautiful outdoor space where they can have a margarita or a mocktail and just really enjoy themselves.
Yes.
They want a place where their kids can go into a game room and like be, they can play for hours while they are outside sunbathing.
Yes.
They want a place where like everybody can gather around. And to your point, it is really a lot of moms that are creating these experiences.
Yes, absolutely. And they're looking for, they're already starting to imagine those moments in their vacation. And so that is why you would not design for your own sort of taste. You need to start thinking through, how is that guest avatar thinking?
And that ties into all the planning that you talked about.
Yes.
To say, you know who's booking, you know why they're coming. That helps lead the design a lot better. Where if you're DIYing it, you have a better idea. Or if somebody works with a professional like yourself to help with the install or the design, it then gives you a little bit more ammunition to say, okay, we know it's going to be Mildred from Nebraska or Carrie from Georgia. And they're coming here because they have their kids' sports, and after their game, they want to make sure that all the kids can be fed around the table and there's a barbecue. Or maybe Mildred from Nebraska is coming and they're coming for a girls' trip because they love coming here for bachelor party. So maybe we should have that accent wall that you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, what's the other mistake? We just talked about, people designing for themselves. What was the other mistake?
Underestimating the amount of time and cost.
Okay.
Right. Again, I think people underwrite all these the investment, which is their big asset, the home, that they underestimate the amount of time it's going to take to launch that property. So the building of the furniture is tremendous. Like, I don't know if you've ever built an Adirondack chair, but you need therapy after you build it.
Especially with the
Allen wrenches, right? I mean, your hands are broken by the end of the day. You're bruised up. You look like you've been in a bar fight. Like, it is hard work to install. You just think, it's a couple beds and a picture on the wall. It's exhausting. It's exhausting, and there's a lot of moving parts. And and I'll bring this up. The cheaper it is on Wayfair, the more work it's going to take for you and the more man hours it's going to take. So if you're finding that $150 bureau, just know it's going to take you 3 hours to
Well, is
build.
there like a middle ground? Because I feel like a lot of folks of mine that buy, let's say, a $2 million house think that they need to have like a $10,000 couch.
No.
So do you think that there's a middle ground between getting like super, super luxury versus getting like the cheapest thing on Wayfair?
So you don't want to get the cheapest thing on Wayfair, but you can get away with not having high-end things in a short-term rental. I mean, there is something to be said, like you want it to be durable, but there is ways. Let's say you buy a $200 bed on Amazon. You buy it because it's this beautiful forest green bed that goes with your design, right? It's only $200. Fantastic. Okay, you know what you do? You drill in more feet on the bottom of that bed.
Sure.
So those little wooden slats don't break. And that's how you get around it. You know, you just think ahead a little bit, like, okay, we got the form there. Let's make the function.
That's also where you're connecting your hosting experience to say, how do I also set this up so that for my client, my investor, that the money that they're spending up front, it's not like in 3 months they're going to come back to, I'm going to say, hey, Mr. Investor, your bed already broke. We need to replace this.
And the bed will break. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how expensive it is. The beds are going to break. So
one of the biggest questions I get on the acquisition side as a realtor is, Jeremy, well, if I spend this much on this amenity, or if I spend this much on the heated pool, or if I spend this much on an accent wall, how much more money is that going to make me? What do you say to that line of questioning?
Well, there actually are apps and platforms you can use to look at light kind properties. So you can look at properties that sleep 12, that have 5 bedrooms, that have a heated pool and a hot tub, and let's say a putt-putt course. And you can compare those to ones that don't maybe have one of those amenities. So you actually can underwrite it for your specific area. So you can look and see like, okay, those that have a pickleball court are potentially making this much money. Or like, you know what, every single property in Scottsdale now has a pickleball court. So maybe we need to start looking at another amenity. Like maybe we need to consider a splash pad for the kid instead of the pickleball court. Like let's start thinking what amenities are actually making people stop and book these properties.
How does this differ then compared to just designing like a regular house? It sounds like we're trying to create like this experience. So if somebody were to look for a service like yours, could they just go to any designer and get this done? Or does all this stuff need to be like very curated for Airbnb?
So I would not use a standard interior designer. Like if you're saying, listen, I'm going to put the money into an interior designer, I would make sure that the interior designer that you're working with is actually either has short-term rental experience or that is all they do. Because I would not consider a designer that is not also doing market research for you. And a lot of these designers actually have their own division where they are doing background. They are checking out who is the guest avatar. What is the perfect number of bedrooms in that community? Who's making more money? They're going to actually be able to come to you and say, listen, in Old Town Scottsdale, we want to have, we know it's bachelorettes, but it's not just bachelorettes. We want to sleep this many. These are the amenities that are really getting you top dollar. And this is how we propose to do it. So I strongly feel like if you're going to pay for a designer, make sure that you're using a specific short-term rental designer. And there are tons of them. You can find them on Instagram. They're all over the place. You know, start seeing who resonates with you.
Seems like it's like very much more on instead of like a look and a feel.
Yes.
Which is part of it, but it's like the data and the research kind of drives like this is a look and feel that consumers are actually willing to pay for versus just going into like, hey, I just bought this house. This is what my taste is. It's mid-century modern, it's boho, so on and so forth. But because we're catering towards other, like the reviews and those top properties will show us the way. What about with design refreshes? Because a lot of folks will come into the market and say, hey, I really want to buy a short-term rental. Wow, it seems like a lot of money, Jeremy, or that seems like a lot of money, Allyson. I don't know if spending, on a designer and doing the install and the furniture, why don't we just buy something that's already in Airbnb? What do you think about that?
Well, very rarely do people sell successful Airbnbs. Sometimes they do. I actually bought one once. So I would first say really be critical of a short-term rental that is on the market for sale. because you'll see it say, oh, successful short-term rental. Yeah, they were probably successful in 2022 when everybody was successful, but are they successful right now? Why are they maybe not successful? You go in, use your critical eye. Well, probably because the furnishings they furnished off of, Facebook Marketplace, or they furnished for themselves. It kind of looks like very dated. People need to go in and be very critical, because you could buy a functioning short-term rental and still need to pull out 80% of the furnishings.
Sounds like they need to be redesigned.
Yes. And it's funny you say that, because I called a bunch of designers to say, okay, how much would you charge to just, to do redesign? And they're like, we charge the exact amount, because it's that much work.
So an investor should just go in that if you are looking for a short-term rental, no, maybe it does have a heated pool, or maybe it does have a pickleball court, which is great that it has those amenities. So you might have some savings, but should they just go in assuming that they're going to have to redesign the whole place?
I would assume, you may get some mattresses out of it. You may get some beds out of it, and maybe a bureau or some lamps, but be prepared to be very critical with every piece that's there.
That's awesome. Well, Thank you for your time today, Allyson. Tell us a little bit about where our listeners can find you, where they can reach out to you if they're interested to learn more.
So you can find us at thesunkissedgroup.com. You can find us at the Sunkissed Group on Instagram and Facebook.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening today, everybody, and we'll see you on the next one.
Passive, really, I think this massive. Stable cash flow, lavish. Bought the finance for the masses. This 14% in manufactured housing. Really, all the deals I be doing is kinda hard to keep on counting. Not really. 10% for the year. It's clear this the new way. Little competition in my arena. Need a house cost arena strategy.
For 10 to 14% returns, invest today with Silvercrest Opportunity Fund.
10% passive, the checks I've lined up with collateral.
Thanks for listening to the AZREIA Show with your hosts, Marcus Maloney and Mike Delpreet. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you found this information valuable, head over to AZREIA.org and learn more about our community.